going on, guys? Welcome to the 24th episode of Axioms on Trial, Reducing Irreducible Complexity. Been excited to do this one. We'll kind of just go free form and have a little discussion about what I consider a clearly debunked notion within the intelligent design community, offered up by one Mr. Michael Behe in Darwin's Black Box, a book that I do not suggest people read, but, read your opposition and get an understanding and a feeling for it. Cease, how are you doing, man? And what do you, what's new, brother?
I'm good. I'm excited for this. And I think we were talking backstage that it might end up being a multiple parts video. I think we're probably going to go over some more general misconceptions about evolution tonight and then go into more depths later on. But yeah, I'm doing well.
Sure.
Just, I don't know, trying to finish school. I'm
Yes.
almost there. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, you're lucky. It's still a very dark cave where I'm at, so
you'll get there.
Yeah, maybe eventually. Yeah, and so I guess that'll we didn't really talk about our backgrounds very much on the show. We haven't very much. And Assis is pursuing his master's in philosophy. I went to school initially for a programming degree with a major in programming with a minor in biology. I then switched that towards the tail end of my associates to try and bridge that with computational biology. Once I realized how much I don't like sitting at a computer and coding, and so this is now becoming more ingrained into my field. And so hopefully I will as well get my master's in computational biology eventually, if it's paid for well enough and I can manage through the amount of time. But anyway, we'll just get right into the meat of everything. Did you want to go ahead and just kind of define irreducible complexity for people, or how would you want to start that so we can?
Yeah, let's do that. I'll start by defining the term. Irreducible complexity is the argument that certain biological systems cannot have evolved by successive small modifications to pre-existing functional systems through natural selection, because no less complex system would function. And this is viewed as sort of a defeater for the theory of evolution, or at the very least a potential problem for evolution to deal with.
Yeah, it tries to undermine a lot of aspects within natural selection, but typically, at least what I've found, and maybe the people who are proponents of irreducible complexity are going to think of this as a typical kind of rhetoric response. But where a lot of this stems from, or at least kind of like the poster child of this, is Darwin's quote saying that it is absurd to the highest degree. And I can't give you the exact quote off the top of my head, but that, something as complex as the eye could come of those kind of processes. Right. But it's always quote mined in that it's never actually taken beyond those parameters into what the actual, because context does matter. I would agree with Christians and religious people that the context of what somebody's saying about it always does matter. And in this one, it matters. It's paramount, because what Darwin was trying to say was that because it seems absurd, we shouldn't apply personal incredulity into our understanding. And so it's kind of a shot in the foot already off the start for people who are proponents of irreducible complexity, who do use this quote saying like, see, look, even Darwin, admitted this. They're not realizing that's propped up for the exact thing that they don't understand.
Of course.
And so that would be like the first thing I would want to throw out there.
And the thing is, even if he wasn't meaning it in that context, who cares? Like we've already, to use a pun, evolved the theory from what Darwin had originally come up with. Mm-hmm. So it's possible for smart scientists to ultimately be wrong in their approach and how they see the world as new information comes in. So, but yeah,
that's actually a good point I want to touch on real fast. And I get this a lot, is that it's kind of, Darwinian evolution, or Darwin. It focuses a lot on Darwin, when we've made a ton of progress an evolutionary theory beyond just Darwin. And so when your interlocutor is so focused on Darwin, it seems as if they're not really that interested in how, we could literally throw away all the fossils we have right now. We don't even need them for the conversation because molecular homology and genomics is going to do everything we need it to do. And so people aren't interested in that conversation. They're interested in kind of pointing out things that Darwin said. And I did want to say that that seems to be at least a telltale sign of the person that doesn't really care to have a genuine conversation about this. And to highlight further, the idea that Darwin is saying we shouldn't dismiss something under the pretense of incredulity is just going to highlight that even more. Is more problematic for your interlocutor. But yeah, so I guess we could kind of go into start it off with Behe's kind of assertion here that you can't remove these parts. And I think he uses, in his book, he uses the example of a mousetrap. And that if you were to get rid of a mousetrap, you're essentially going to have this fall apart, right at the seams. The quick objection that you would have there immediately is a mousetrap did not come out of any natural process.
Right.
But worse than that, the mousetrap has a goal. Like the design of building the mousetrap has an actual goal. Natural selection does not have a goal. There's no goal in mind. It is reacting to environmental pressures and adapting, as a guided way in that aspect. But it doesn't actually have this goal, right? And like this superhuman thing that we're going to become. And so you already have a problem with the mousetrap in that the mousetrap has a goal. This doesn't. The mousetrap, the metal components, didn't develop through living cells reproducing, right? Or or reproducing. I'm sorry. Well, I guess essentially, yeah, reproducing or replicating. Sorry, thank you. Brain farting. Through replication, and so it wouldn't be weird. It would be weird to kind of throw those two in the same hat. It's just entirely not analogous. But you can also take the example and remove the base and fixate it to the floor, right? And so now he's going to argue that you've just swapped one base for another base. But what I'm going to argue here is that we have entirely different functions from swapping the base, and so that you can actually use this example. The base of the mousetrap is going to have the function of being able to be movable. We're going to be able to move that around. The function of it being onto the floor, for example, is that, let's say the mouse, now it's already in the backdrop of what it's used to, running around the floor. Now this trap is seemingly a part of the same aesthetic backdrop that it's used to. It's not an extra-additional base there or an object. And so there are different functions when you swap that base from another base. And so we can actually see that. But yeah, so I don't want to keep rambling, but anything you would want to touch upon on the analogy there?
I just think that it's funny when intelligent designers use analogies that in principle are already failing to do what they wanted to. Like, you're not gonna find a defeater for evolution by using something that's artificial. The entire point is that when it comes to biological life, these things function differently. And so you're comparing apples and oranges because you're not recognizing the inherent difference.
Can I interrupt you? I would say that you're not arguing apples and oranges. You're arguing an apple versus a fucking Chevy. They're right. Completely different. And I'm not even kidding. It literally is the exact example. Yeah. A Chevy and an apple. I mean, we're talking about a man-made thing and a non-man-made thing, something that went through an evolutionary process, something that did not go through an evolutionary process. So it's literally arguing apples to Chevys.
Well, okay. Before we get into it, I just got to show a couple comments. He wrote this, but then said,
"It's a goal."
What's the joke? Don't golf for me.
Yeah, no. We'd have to. I would give the person the benefit of the doubt and say, "Well, what do you mean by goal?" But yeah. I would definitely. We would get to the point of it does not have what you're defining it as, unless you just define goal differently.
And then Chase writes, "What? Wrong thing. Where did it go? Hold on, I lost it.
ask my professors about extended synthesis. I have talked to them about that. I'll do an episode about that. I've had a mixed bag. I've had a lot laugh about it, but they're not all my professors. These are people within the actual department itself.
Right.
But yeah, I'll have to do more on that. With the COVID thing, it's a little weird how everything's working with school in Georgia. It's a lot less restricted, but there's still that right now in the aspect of I'm taking a lot of online class or multiple online classes instead. But regardless, so yeah, anything else you kind of want to touch on before we move on away from?
No, I'm ready.
Okay, so before we move on to Behe, this doesn't really matter very much, but I wanted to kind of have a disclaimer. So this doesn't prove anything Behe says wrong or anything by any means, but there's a disclaimer here that Behe has argued in court that he would redefine science in such a way that astrology would be included. So we have to keep in mind of the person that is writing this also thinks that astrology is viable in that. And for me, that's important to mention because he's talking about a pseudoscience that doesn't care about falsification in any aspect of the scientific method.
That's terrible. I didn't know that. That's awful.
He's also admitted in court that there's no peer-reviewed papers that substantiate his conjecture of irreducible complexity. So I just wanted to throw those out there, plant a flag, everybody can see it. And if that's not the case, someone wants to challenge me on that, then please all do. But anyway. So yeah, so I guess we touched there on kind of the misquote for Darwin and getting into the mousetrap kind of thing. I guess we just dive into kind of the issue with this and the typical kind of argument I think that's presented is the eye, the development of the eye. And so would there be anything you kind of want to talk about, at least the kind of the conjecture made within development of the eye or those types of things before we get into that?
Well, I'll just make a very quick comment that it's ironic when intelligent design followers use the example of the eye, because it's a very good example of why evolution is actually correct.
Oh yeah.
And they don't realize that it is. So by pointing to the eye, it's just ironic how confused.
Yeah, and I wanted to get some graphics for it, but I will have to just kind of do without for now. I didn't have the time to get. But essentially, we could look at the eye through a series of stages here within evolutionary development. So what you're going to have at the very first stages are light-sensitive cells that have the ability to distinguish between light and dark. And so now you have an advantageous trait that's going to be passed on. And so now if we're to kind of fast forward that to forming a cup in some aspects, maybe not even a deep cup, just a little shallow cup. Well, now it's going to allow for more cells to distinguish a multitude of different angles of light. And so now you have even more of an advantageous trait that should be passed on. And so especially when it's kind of helping the aspect of predation. And so as the cup deepens, now it gets to the ability where you can detect these blurry kind of images similar to like a pinhole camera, where you have that, just a little bit of light that gets in. In this case, you're going to have the cup, or on all sides of the cup, you're going to have these cells that distinguish light. And so clearly, it's really easy to follow. The more you have of that, the more that it can actually detect given the angles. Now, once that cup forms and has well, I guess before we get into the fixated like muscle movements of it, now you have like a mucus that's produced that forms within the globule. I think I'm saying that right. And this focuses the aspect of bent light, which is going to now improve the image. And so now each one of these steps you're going to you're gonna have a reason to have this passed on within natural selection. And when the mucus hardens, now you have a curved lens that's going to allow for a sharper image. And so then the subsequent adaptation beyond that's going to be this kind of muscle controlment that's going to increase focus. Now, the issue here is that we can look at this as a continuous improvement of additions, right? Or addition of improvements. But what's worse for like the intelligent design crowd is that natural selection doesn't go through this process of just adding steps, right? It's not just saying We add this step, 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 we take it down, it all falls down. That's not how this works. We actually have things within evolutionary development that are streamlined. When it's beneficial for the organism, or if it's physically exhausting for the organism to have a specific say trait or a specific function, if you can take away or you can add and streamline it, that is the route that the evolution is going to take. And so the best example I've heard this, to use an analogy and to kind of go with Behe, and we can use a man-made object here with function, right? We can go to kind of what he likes to do. We could look at a bridge that has an arc, and we could say that arc serves as a function as a bridge. You take a piece out of the arc, you don't have a bridge. You have no function. It collapses under its own structural integrity. Well, that problem solved very quickly by adding a wooden reinforcement, a step of adding something so that when you do take that apart, you're actually not getting a collapse under its weight. And that's what evolution essentially can do. That's what natural selection essentially can do, is it can add steps or streamline these steps so that when you do try to go backwards, you're not really seeing the bigger picture of it, because you are looking at it from a top-down perspective.
Right.
But sorry, that's a lot to be said there within the development of the eyes, or kind of anything you would want to, because I can actually show the intermediate stages of all the development of the eye. I can actually show you the specific living organisms right now that have these transitional development stages of the eye. So before I guess I could get into that, like, what would you want to add to that?
No, this is kind of a random thing that I was just reminded of while listening to you saying this stuff, that when I first was getting into sort of trying to figure out what I believed and watching debates between religious people and scientists and philosophers, one of the very first debates I ever watched was, and this will speak volumes on the first impression of these things, was Ray Comfort and the Kirk Cameron actor guy having a debate about evolution versus intelligent design against, I forget who they were.
Well, by the way, can I say that Ken Ham and Kirk Cameron are my favorite biologists? I just wanted to throw that out. They're my absolute favorite biologists.
And I just remember watching this debate, not even really knowing a whole lot about evolution myself or any other stuff, and immediately just having the intuition that, yeah, these guys don't know what they're talking about. Like, I don't know what this stuff is, and I can tell that there is just something that's off here. But the other comment I'll make is I was thinking about a comment that my brother made when he was on our show last. When he was talking about how some of these ideas on a common sense level can seem to make sense, right? Like it could be sensible to think that something like the evolutionary process has to have been put into motion.
To be put into motion. What would that specifically mean?
So, like, if we look at how complex the ways how complex the eye is, or how complex nature is, it's not completely unreasonable to think that, well, a god must have put this in place. But it's when we actually start to observe on a deeper level,
sure,
on a closer level, what these processes actually are. Yeah.
Well, I would say, to touch upon what you're saying, is that I actually have like a deep like empathy for that idea of someone going like I respect that they look around and go, they're essentially saying that this is beautiful. This is a complex thing. Look how awesome, I see the same thing. I just don't ever see that, because it's complex, that you can now invoke your own personal incredulity to describe the why there.
And that's the thing that was brought up in that one show was, you don't get to truth by just sitting down and just thinking about it and not making observations. Like, there has to be a method that allows us to go deeper and to actually challenge our assumptions and potentially get underneath them to uncover something that's on at a deeper level of reality.
Sure. Yeah. And so with the I think before we kind of move on from that, there we actually have the intermediate stages within it's kind of, so there's two things here. One, let's look at the human eye. To look at the complexity and go, wow, such a beautiful thing. Well, it is, but you miss out on the fact that our eye is not very well evolved at all. We have a blind spot. There's a lot of things wrong with our eye comparatively to other organisms. But in regards to the actual intermediate stages here, we can actually look at just like microbes or anything that have these light sensitive patches. We see that development, that stage there. We see shallow cups within flatworms. So you look there. You can look at the notulus and see a pinhole eye. And so you can get all these developmental stages. None of these are conjecture in the way that people would want to say that it's just purely hypothesis. These are backed up within the fossil record, within living organisms today. In that case, so with the eye, I mean, I guess really it's probably the farthest that you can go with the eye. If at that point you're going to have some disagreements, but another kind of thing that's brought up beyond the eye is I don't remember what type of beetle it is, the bombier beetle. Essentially, the intelligent design folks claim that it produces a defense mechanism, like a projectile defense mechanism, with chemicals that basically would cause an explosion, and that they have this inhibitor or anti-inhibitor. But it's to not, like, that one is just simply to not understand that the chemical compounds isn't a dichotomy in the sense of that it's mixed and it explodes, it's not mixed, it doesn't. It's that it can have weaker reactions versus stronger reactions. It also misses the fact that these beetles have a very specific valve at which the substance is kind of squeezed out of the or whatever term you'd want to use, but projected out of the abdomen. So there's a lot more of a process there in regards to that. Have you heard anything about the bombardier beetle? I can't remember what it's called. I'm losing my thought process.
Yeah, I remember watching a documentary.
Bombardier, that's what it's called. The bombardier.
That's what it was, right?
The bombardier beetle.
Right. And I remember they talked about that. This was years ago, so my memory is not super fresh on it. But yeah, I've definitely heard that before. I just wasn't. I don't remember the details, or I didn't remember the detail.
Well, and I'm not a biochemist or chemistry guy, or really a chemistry guy in that sense, but the chemicals involved is going to be hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone. I don't remember how to pronounce it, but those, if you actually were to look at that from the level of the reaction within the beetle, you're not going to get what they claim of the beetle exploding by any means. But that's one that I've heard as well, that it's kind of like, I don't have too much, I guess, to talk about on that. I don't, especially in regards to biochemistry, is not my thing. But yeah, so I guess we could move on. Is there any kind of thing you would want to touch upon?
Well, I don't know if you want to go into this now, but Mark left a comment. I don't know if you saw it. I'll put it up.
Sorry, I don't have my screen up, so let me back up.
No, I just put it up.
Can you read it? Because it's my screen.
Yeah, I'll read it.
I make my screen like this small, so I can't read the text.
No worries. Could you explain how the tracing of the DNA works? Like the stuff I know Francis Collins worked with. Can't remember what it was called.
The tracing of the DNA. I need you to specifically go more. What do you mean by the tracing of the DNA?
Yeah, I'm not sure what is referring to there. I know that Francis Collins worked on the Genome Project. If I'm not mistaken, he's also the same guy that turned to Jesus Christ when he saw a frozen waterfall that was frozen three different streams, and that convinced him of the.
That's that guy. I was trying to think of why his name sounded so familiar.
And that convinced him of the truth of the Trinity. Like, people, it's just so weird that someone can be a scientist and then be convinced like that with something like that. Sure. But anyway, yeah, I don't know what. Maybe Mark, maybe
you could elucidate on that, and I'll be
because I'm not sure.
I mean, I assume he's talking about like touch DNA. I just don't know what he.
Oh, he said. Okay, so he said, yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, I think he's asking more to elaborate on the Human Genome Project.
Sure, I think I would need him to elucidate on what specifically he.
Or part. Also, Mark says that's not why he came to Christ. Yeah, no, I maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I do remember that he had said something about having that kind of spiritual experience. Now, I don't know if that. I don't know the full thing. I don't know what else contributed, but I know that was part of it. Sure. But anyway, not to get off the.
Yeah. No. So yeah. Okay. Sorry. So yeah. So with the arch kind of example, there is that. That's the kind of thing that I think is a really good example, because the idea that you're going to be able to like remove this part, it seems on its face like, yes, I mean the function stops there, but without understanding the processes in evolution at which gets you to, say, like in the example of the bridge, this addition of the wooden structure, this thing that kind of serves as that backbone. The flagellum is the flagellum. I always get pissy at people when they say the flagellum, but flagella is a really good example of this, ironically, because the flagella is going to have like about 50 different proteins, and the proponent of irreducible complexity or intelligent design is going to say that if you take away a protein, you're going to essentially get this like, a dead flagella, or a useless a flagella that has no function there due to the removable of its part. But we actually know that it's demonstrably false, because we actually have like, say if you I can't remember who it is that said it, but so this would be probably a bad quote, but let's say you remove half of its proteins, right? You actually are now left with a system used by the bacteria that can inject toxins into a host cell. Clearly, that is a function, right?
Yeah.
There's no non-function, going on in that process. Right. So, and there's also this idea that you've removed essentially what you've claimed are these essential parts of the, these proteins, these components that are essential part of the flagella. Well, or a flagella. Please stop saying the flagellum, but it doesn't sound right, and it's not. But yeah, so you get this kind of thing where not only can you remove those, you actually get new functionality out of it. You get a secondary functionality, right. And so when you do reduce components, right, you actually can find secondary components or functions within the removal of that. Of that component from the biological system there. And then it's one of those things where it's like, you're only going to have this problem if you don't understand the addition, the streamline, and the actual process itself. I mean, the entire idea of irreducible complexity is to just not understand the process of natural selection. It's just to ignore everything natural selection says, and in place, stick it with your ignorance. If you want to show kind of your ignorance of the field in any way, you would be a proponent for irreducible complexity. Though I do give like credit to them for having at least one somewhat scientific element to their assertions, because in every other thing it doesn't seem to be the case. And I think that's what we'll go on to talk about now is kind of the intelligent design and falsification or lack of that might be there. Would you kind of want to get started on some things in that realm?
Yeah. Was this the website I found you're referring to?
It might be whatever you think that's.
Yeah, I'll read you. So it's a short article on this website, and it's titled "Intelligent Design is Falsifiable." And just stop me when you hear something that you want to comment on, obviously. There's a belief among media commentators that intelligent design is unscientific because it is unfalsifiable or untestable. no empirical evidence can count against it. Though common, this charge is demonstrably false. Of course, there's no way to falsify a mere assertion that a cosmic designer exists. That much we agreed on. But contemporary design arguments focus not such on vague claims, but on detectable evidence for a design in the natural world. Therefore, design arguments currently in play are falsifiable. Okay, that's already weird to me, how that's being phrased. Because I'll just say a quick thing, like,
Sure.
How are you finding design by looking at the world? Maybe finding complexity, but you don't get at the leap from that to design without assuming that.
Well, you also, I'm just going to just real fast. It's also just it's arbitrary to start out with, to look at the things that are complex in that sense. What if I decide, like, I mean, this is tandem to the watchmaker analogy, right? Like, you find complexity within that, it must be designed in some aspect. I see a snowflake that's spontaneously formed. So then, therefore, the universe spontaneously formed. I mean, that's the argument. Because I can find examples in nature like a snowflake where there's spontaneous, and almost even you're producing the same one you're gonna yield not very successful results. But does that now mean that I can use that as the basis for a complex system that spontaneously forms and use that as the evidence? I guess I could, right? But I don't think that'd be a fair way to go about it. And I don't think that the intelligent design crowd should do that either.
Right. Mark is a good.
Yeah, I saw their videos today for the first time, actually, and oh my god, it's bad.
I would love to go through that with you at some point, because that sounds like fun.
I went through someone, I can't remember the guy's name. I should know his name because he's popped up in a lot of different things, but he started talking about flagella and how it's proof of irreducible complexity. But I don't know. I would sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, I wouldn't know much about discovery science, but I would definitely love to do a video on that. It'd be great.
Yeah, we gotta do more breakdown clips, because those are fun. It's fun just getting annoyed at people's confusions.
Sure. Yeah, and so I guess we went into the I guess before we get into the falsification there, I would want to point out that in the article that you sent me, and I got to read over because I didn't get the most time to look at it, but it didn't seem that there was. So if your claim is that it's falsifiable, and as somebody, because I'm making the claim right now that it's not falsifiable. I do not find intelligent design to be a falsifiable claim. It seems to have the same problem of a theist arguing for this necessary being, at which we can now go, okay, I believe in a necessary foundation from which maybe all contingent things come from. But I can't make the leap that you have this mind. And that to me seems to be the same problem. It seems to be this problem of like a post hoc rationalization, where now it's like, hey, this could explain it, but I have to add, I'm essentially going to have to add this extra step. And for me, like, I think the principle of parsimony is applicable here, and that, like, we shouldn't be trying to like explain things with more entities that are necessary, or more assumptions that are necessary.
Yeah, ironically, the same article I sent you ends up talking about Michael Behe, as you just did, using Darwin's black box as an argument for the falsifiability of intelligent design. So I guess in a way we went over this, but yeah, it's not that long, so I'll just read it anyway.
Sure.
Consider the argument that Michael Behe makes in his book Darwin's Black Box. There, he proposes that design is detectable in many molecular machines, including the bacterial flagellum. Behe argues that this tiny motor needs all its parts to function. It is irreducibly complex. Such systems, in our experience, are a hallmark of design systems because they require the foresight that is exclusive jurisdiction of intelligent agents. Okay, actually, we just went over this. So I don't think we even really need to to do with that part of it. Really,
Yeah, I mean, to me, all that, or even trying to get to these kind of irreducible systems, like just the flagella, to me it's always their poster child example, and it's going to be my poster child example because nearly any constituent protein in flagella is going to be identified with with other proteins that have different functions, and so it's just not the case. Like.
Right.
My thing, like when people bring up these arguments, it's empirically wrong. It's not like there's no, if you don't accept it, you're a flat earther trying to convince us that the earth is flat. I mean, that's essentially what your arguments boil down to, because all you're left to do when I reduce parts, now I have these constituent proteins that are identified with other proteins in flagella. Now the only thing left to do is for them to say, well, you can't bridge those two, you can't, like those two gaps, or those intermediate spaces at which you've reduced, they want you to like reduce those more. But I don't have to. I've already debunked your claim of it being irreducible. I've already done that. It doesn't matter how many steps I show you. I've shown you steps. You're wrong. I've shown you where it streamlines. I've shown you, how this protein affects this protein. I showed you once I remove this protein or multitude of proteins, say in the flagella, now we have a viral toxin that infects different host cells. Like I've shown you these secondary functions. So I just don't see how people have that argument when I can just show you one thing and it debunks the entire conjecture.
So I'll read you this next part.
It falsifies the conjecture. How about that?
Right.
So
the next part is a little bit, I don't fully really understand what this is even saying. It says, to move from biology to astronomy and cosmology, in The Privileged Planet, Guillermo Gonzalez and Jay Richards describe how to falsify their design argument. They argue that there is a correlation between the conditions needed for life and the conditions needed for diverse types of scientific discovery, and suggest that such a correlation, if true, points to intelligent design. They write, one recent work in the philosophy of science has revealed the degree to which high-level scientific theories tend to resist simple refutation. If it were applied consistently, in fact, every theory in science would be hastily rejected. As a result, Karl Popper's criterion of falsifiability, which most commentators seem to presuppose, was rejected by most philosophers of science decades ago as a litmus test for science. Nevertheless, it is certainly a virtue of scientific proposals to be able to say what evidence could count against it.
What was that? What was that last sentence about philosophy of science? Because that struck me a little odd, because I'm wondering, and I'm not trying to shit on philosophy or anything in that regard, but if I heard that right, I'm just not seeing where in the lab anybody in philosophy of science is showing that to be the case, as opposed to some a priori remark.
I mean, from my limited sort of exposure to philosophy of science, there's a lot of garbage in there, and I'm a philosophy student.
I would say it sounds like that's part of the garbage right there.
But the problem, but there is a miscommunication. From my experience, talking to both philosophers and scientists, there's a clear talking past each other.
Okay.
Where fundamentally a lot of scientists don't understand philosophy and the implications that their science has.
Sure.
And equally, a lot of philosophers don't understand the science they're commenting on. So they're saying things without really grasping the full picture of what science is actually doing.
Yeah, I would actually think that's very fair to say.
But yeah, this idea that this correlation between conditions needed for life points to design. Again, where does it do that? You know, I don't see anywhere here about falsification.
Well, so here's the issue. It's just a lot easier than that, right? It's so much easier. We can strip away all the kind of the philosophy of science and all, just for 1 second. I mean, I'm sure someone's going to argue, well, this is part of that, right? Sure, to some degree it is. But let's start with the empirical testing. how are we empirically testing intelligent design? Do we have empirical tests? Do we have one? Because I don't see one. I don't see we have anyone. Are we violating the principle of parsimony? Are we adding an extra step? Sounds like it to me. Sounds like this is because from my perspective is that every empirical test that now we're going to have within evolution is going to be the embodiment of intelligent design. Like, oh yes, that is explained not by a common ancestor, but by common designer, right? And so, well, the problem is though, is that we're sticking in the realm of life and following it back in a trail. When you add this entity that is not part of we have no reason to think it's part of that, right? You're going to have to admit that, like, you couldn't use the argument and say, well, you're begging the question with a common ancestor, or like you couldn't say that because it's not begging the question. It's part of the reproduction cycle that we're witnessing in terms of passing on alleles and having parents and sexual reproduction and all these things. The violation of the principle of parsimony is going to come into play when you're adding this extra thing, because you're going to agree potentially, especially when the final nail's in the coffin, you're going to agree, okay, there's a common ancestor once it's proven to their liking, which from my perspective it already has been. But once they get what they need, they're going to say that's part of the working model we have. And to me, that just highlights this violation of parsimony, where you're just going to add now entities that are unnecessary.
Right. Right.
And where's the consistency in that from my perspective? There isn't any.
I'll keep going. There's a few more paragraphs here. The most decisive way to falsify our argument as a whole will be to find a distant and very different environment, which, while quite hostile to life, nevertheless offers a superior platform for making as many diverse scientific discoveries as does our local environment. The opposite of this would have the same effect, finding an extremely habitable and inhabited place that was a lousy platform for observation. I don't understand how this makes intelligent design falsifiable. They're assuming things about the observations that the observations don't suggest.
Yeah, I would take like a Sean Carroll perspective of that. Hey, call me an empiricist all you want, but no a priori argument that you can make is going to be able to help you distinguish the pseudoscience from an actually accepted science, in the sense of that, like, you're only going to see that through the empirical testing. That's it. That's the only option you have in terms of that, because it's inherently empirical in every aspect. It's not a priori in any sense.
Right. They're just they're making assumptions that are not falsifiable, and then creating a hypothetical where, well, if you could show this thing that it would falsify our assumptions that are not based in the observations to begin with. Like, they're going about it entirely wrong.
Well, yeah, it's just you have this lack of any empirical basis, and then once you want to throw the hat into the realm of that, well, sorry, we don't appeal to your. And I'm not saying that in this case what you're saying is the case. This is just more so from what I've heard, but it's kind of this. Well, you're appealing to strict empiricism or scientism. Well, when we're talking about a falsification criterion here and stuff within,
that's what we're talking about.
We're talking empirical. We're not. You can't bridge this a priori argument from the separation of a pseudoscience to a science. Like I'm going to agree there with a guy like Sean Carroll, where that it's just. It's not outright saying a priori is not useful in any way. It's just to say, like, I just don't see how you're going to bridge that argument.
Anyway, the issue with intelligent design is not just that it's unfalsifiable. It's also it lacks any kind of empirical basis. It just makes assumptions, and then and makes false connections. So anyway, we can leave that.
I mean, this is just methods within methodological naturalism, right? I mean, this isn't you have to have an a posteriori criterion here. You're talking about empirical findings and empirical falsification, and that's what you're specifically talking about here. You don't get to weave in and out of this kind of like a priori, analysis, based in philosophy of science because it's inconvenient for the positions that you hold. Well, we're getting results out of this. To say that the falsification criterion isn't useful, well, in that regard, or that maybe it needs to be revised in some ways, well, it doesn't for science of medicine. It seems to be doing very, very well there. It seems to be providing medicine for family members I have and things of that. And I think falsification is the highest criterion involved besides the peer review part, especially with medications and making sure there's no long-term effects there. But to remove that from the a posteriori concepts here, it seems that now you're just what are we talking about now? Like at least that's just from my perspective. But claim that it's been it has been falsified. Yeah. I mean, I showed that just simply by the constituent proteins that are identified with other proteins. You remove, say, around half of the 50 proteins within a flagella, and you have one that's infecting host cells with toxins. It's completely different function, and it's been reduced. So I agree. Yeah, 100%. It's just to not understand the process at all and how things are added. That's why I love the bridge analogy. I think it's a perfect analogy in terms of the fact that it's also using a man-made object, which is what Beakey wants to use. You know what I mean? So I think it's just ironically, it's poetic in some ways, but
kind of turns it back around on them.
Yeah, it's poetic because then if they're going to say, well, that's not analogous, and be like, well, then you've seen the problem.
Right.
So.
Right.
So I'm trying to play on your ball court with your rules to show you how dumb they are, right? But at the same time, it's like it is a working analogy in the fact that the missing component that they don't have is the streamline of these functions.
So is there more on irreducible complexity that you wanted to touch on?
No, not really. I mean, I think that's pretty much about it for me. I don't think you need to go as much to go further than that. I think the eye and contrary to what they think, I think the eye and flagella do exactly what you need it to do on an evolutionary standpoint. And I think it's the best example because since those are the ones they find to be the most integral to dismissing it. I think you cut it off at the source in some ways.
So I think this is a good point. He says, so intelligent design does make falsifiable claims, but that is not enough for it to be a scientific theory. It also has to make predictions.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree that it's falsifiable because I don't see any of the claim. I don't see what predictions are being made. So how am I going to falsify the novel predictions? That's kind of, I guess, where I'm saying. If they are there, then I'd like to see them. I think
it's making a distinction between the predictive power and just the claims that it makes that could be open to falsification.
Yeah, it just seems that it can make the same predictions, right? So we can now take this kind of the problem of underdetermination and take all the data. That's all. Okay, that's all I see. And begin to know, let me know if you would agree with this distinction or where I'm wrong here. But to me, it seems that all intelligent design is the perfect example of the underdetermination problem, where you now we all both look at the exact same evidence and we determine a completely different conclusion. But they are not actually making the predictions, the novel predictions that would distinguish their conclusion from our conclusion.
Right. And
thus, because they don't have those predictions, there's nothing to falsify. That's kind of my perspective, I guess. I don't know.
No, I think I get what you're saying. Let me go over some of these general misconceptions about evolution that I think you and I run into a lot when.
Mark, please let me know which ones. If someone makes predictions in intelligent design, I'd love to see them. Because I don't see any predictions that aren't just piggybacking off of predictions that natural selection has already successfully made.
This is one misconception that I run into constantly whenever I see Christian or even some Muslim people either on TikTok or YouTube talk about evolution, where they'll say things like, well, evolution can't attest to the origin of life. Yeah, it doesn't claim to, right? Like abiogenesis is its own thing. No one's claiming that evolution is trying to do that. Am I on track with that?
The last part of it cut out.
Evolution is a theory about the origin of life. It's not about the origin of life. It's about the evolution of that life once it's there, right?
Sorry, for some reason your volume is really low. I can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, it might be on my end. I don't know.
Yeah. So the first misconception that I was referring to is something that I think you and I run into a lot, which is the claim that evolution is a theory about the origin of life.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. That would be the biggest mistake you could make.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, the origin of life does not deal with that. This is why a lot of biologists, myself included, or I'm not a biologist yet, but somebody who's pursuing to be one at least. This is why, like, we don't. Like, I'm not a biochemist. Like, I don't really know chemistry that well. I hope to someday. I hope to have a better understanding of it, and I would love to get into that. But that's like that might not be someone's field. If they get into computational biology or they get into just making programs for comparative genomics, something like that, they're not going to be working on abiogenesis unless that's what it particularly handles, because this is the origin of life, not the evolution of life. It's
right.
It's a completely different topic entirely. That just should detail to you that your interlocutor doesn't really know what they're talking about.
Right. The second one is, can you hear me better now? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think it's just my headphones. Honestly, I think it's something wrong with the cable. Should get ones without.
Okay. The next one is evolutionary theory implies that life evolved and continues to evolve randomly or by chance.
Life continues to evolve randomly. Is that what it said?
Yeah, or by chance.
No. So the mutations can occur purely by chance. So like we take some bacteria and we, you might get like a drug resistant strain of the bacteria due to pure chance, right? The proliferation or the bacteria being able to pass that on is not through chance by any means. That is through a process of selection based on its pressures or environmental pressure. So it's the same thing with other organisms. If it, there is no, this was chance, it was selected for. It's the mutation or the, at the beginning that actually is the part that's chance there. So,
right.
Random.
The next one is,
which at that point, by the way, we should define random, which I think I have a definition already in here for that.
Go ahead, yeah.
I think I do here. Yep, random, which is just a lack of pattern or predictability in events, and so that's
which is different, right, than not determined, which is what I think they were trying to suggest. That is just
exactly, and I'd have a distinction there in the fact that natural selection selecting for that is clearly not. It's clearly a pattern. There's a pattern there. It's not of some random non-causal type of thing that's going on there. There's a pattern, a specific pattern there that we can analyze. We actually can disprove that just simply by like the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, which is just like how we can see the factors like within like non-random mating and all these types of things of what the allele frequency like distribution is in a population and whether or not evolution is even occurring. We can use these through like the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium to even show these factors, right? So it's right. It goes more in depth than people who have a surface level understanding could imagine.
I'll read you a few more here. Evolution results in progress. Organisms are always getting better through evolution.
No. Nope. That's not true. The organisms are not always getting better as a result. I feel like if that was the case, like why we have 99% of organisms extinct at the moment wouldn't be
right
sense. But no, that there is no goal. That's not the to conflate this with a goal is just not understand. Like all these kind of objections are just like 101 stuff that you'd have to get past before you can talk to somebody with knowledge in the field to actually have a fruitful conversation, because you're just going to be stuck. You're going to be stuck at the door before you get into biology 101. You know what I mean? Like you're just going to be arguing with the teacher before you even sit down for class.
I think the argument that aggravates me the most is when people will say things like, we never observed. Oh, well, one is when a Christian says, I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. I don't know how many times you've heard that being said, but microevolution is simply microevolution on a larger scale. And they'll say things like, well, we can't observe it happening on that large scale. Like science can't observe it the way that it observes empirically other things.
Yeah.
Well, how would you respond to that?
Well, first off, I want to make a clarification point with the getting better thing in regards to adaptation, that is a huge thing. So there's a distinction in sorry to go back to the last question, but it just popped in my head. That there is a level of adaptation that is beneficial and promotes this, but it's not that like the distinction I'm making is that the organisms themselves are not getting better. It's also that like organisms themselves aren't evolving. It's populations. It's allele frequencies distribution. That's kind of an issue. But sorry. Anyway, say that last part again, and I'll answer that. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, when it's the issue of when we hear Christians or Muslims say things like, I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution.
Oh, that's just to deny the actual time involved with it.
Right.
Because that's all the distinction in there is over a broad period of time. If you believe microevolution, you believe macroevolution. I posed this question to my friend who is doing academic papers right now within COVID research. He goes to UGA and he's a biochemistry. He's a biochemistry major. He was going for his doctorates, but he ended up like dropping out, just getting his master's. He was like, I couldn't do all the work that was necessary. He was like, I just said, screw it, I'll be good with my master's. But I've talked to him about this, and I just went outside and asked him a question. Was like, what do you think about this? Way someone poses the distinction between micro and macro, and he thinks it's like the dumbest question ever. So if you're admitting that you agree with microevolution, then you agree with macroevolution. My distinction would come into is unless you're like a young Earth creationist, and then you're just positing the idea that time doesn't exist, like the time frame involved isn't there. Right. And then that's the only time where I think you could be consistent in saying I believe in microevolution in some degrees, but not macro. But then you would also be admitting that, like, to me, at that case, if in the future a hypothetical time frame of the same amount of time that we think we have now, then you will have that progress over macro. So now you're going to have to tell me what it is through that, say a million years from your young Earth creationist standpoint. What is it about the microevolution? Like what will change, or will it not change at all? And if so, if there's no change over time, what is that theory? How do you show that to me? Because now you have something new, a very new thing there that can be tested in the future. And so,
and they always follow it up with, evolution isn't scientific because we can't observe something on our large scale. But they're not focusing on the fact that we can observe the so the support for evolution is found in multiple fields of science, and the fact that we can't observe it on the timeline, like in the future, is not really relevant when we're able to make predictions of what kind of fossil we're going to find, and then we find it. We can make predictions on the short term.
Yeah.
Whether it's like, most of modern medicine is based on things that, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, a lot of modern medicine is based on what evolution explains us.
Yeah, exactly. It does. But yeah, so there's a lot there. There's the time scale. First off, if you've posit this idea that we haven't witnessed evolution in some way, one, you're expecting Pokemon evolution in some weird way, and we're just in a completely different conversation at that point. But another thing is that if you've set this idea up in your head, you've set up this criterion that we can't witness. If any process takes millions of years, that explains something. Well, in your mind, that will never, ever be an actual viable explanation for anything. Geological erosion, mountain formation, plate tectonics. You're now set yourself up to, you've literally made it so you could never believe that. So even if that is Cartesian certainty, 100% true, this X takes a long period of time. Well, the person that's positing this, we don't observe it, they'll never, ever be able to believe it, that it's true. They've already just set themselves up in that situation. And so that's the first problem I have with that idea, is that you're expecting in a science that what we're saying is going to take, clearly it's going to take longer than the history of the proposed science we have, right? Like, clearly we have like a couple hundred years into this. You go back to Darwin. Like, if you expect us to have this process of seeing something which we're admitting takes longer than
that's not how it works.
Than the science, has even been around, then we have a lot of things we have to get over. But the problem there is, to touch on what you're saying, is we have so many fields of science that are intermingled with evolutionary theory, that we can make predictions based on the supercontinent, that if we have all these species here and then the land masses break, we have continental drift, we should expect to see fossils here, we should expect to see fossils there, and not even just that, we should expect to see the fossils over here in a very specific layer of the stratum, and here we should be able to see it in a very specific, and we do. It checks out every single time we make these predictions, we do. Now, the problem that's subsequent for that is that when we do find these, this might change our tree of life. It might change phylogeny in some ways of how we look at things. And that's where the creationists or the intelligent designers come in. Well, you're changing your models, or you're changing this, or this, this isn't here. We are literally organizing animals, or organizing organisms in a way that is arbitrary from our distinctions in some ways, right? But once we have a better grasp or understanding of it, like, there's a reason why they're classified in certain ways. There's a reason why we claim.
But there's nothing wrong with science doing that. That's the point, is that we're updating, our knowledge with new information. But I love the inconsistency with the religious people that use that sort of the time span as a problem, because they have no problem when it comes to God and using that as an explanation for something, and then suddenly it becomes a problem for evolution. Like, there's just an inconsistency there. The worst for me is when they'll say things like, well, we've never seen a dog turn into a cat. Yeah. And it's like, okay, you just proven that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, that's not what evolution is saying happens.
Yeah. Well, so I would get them to define what they mean by a kind, whether they're meaning a species or a clade, because that's going to be very fruitful for the conversation in terms of what it is that they're saying. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions. There's some things at least I would want to touch upon before we end the show on human evolution, which is something I find very fascinating. And to go to the classification, like, they'll make claims that, like, traits that define hominoids are arbitrary, for example. But they're not. I mean, like, we look at apes, they have, we have a very wide criterion, right? We have short, wide backs, barrel-shaped chests, robust pelvic girdles. We have ape skulls, whether the flattened face or frontal bones that are infused at the midline. Like, there's all these different things that we use. Taxonomists, for example, are going to use mammary glands, hair, diaphragm, having a 3 middle ear, ossiles, sweat glands, scent glands, 4-chambered hearts. None of these things are arbitrary. Like when I say that they're arbitrary in some senses, they're arbitrary in the ideas that maybe arbitrary is not the right way to put it, but that they're, things just are. And as a nominalist, this will make sense for people who are also nominalists. We are just defining these things and categorizing them in certain ways that are going to change based on our understanding, clearly. And I think like the jaws, like the when you look at like the parabolic shape in jaws and things like that, like when we kind of look at these hominins or anything like that, and we compare them, we see these. They're only reinforcing how we actually classify things as we go on anyway. So it's not even like this issue of that things change as much. It's almost that they reinforce them in a lot of ways, or at least how we do it in the taxonomy sense. But sorry, I wanted to say, to get into the evolution thing or the human evolution thing, was that there's this claim that's going around that I've heard about humans having different neurons, like a rosehip neuron, and other orphan genes that are highly expressed in the brains of humans, but not primates. Well, like if we look, all primates are going to have a large brain to body ratio when compared to other mammals. And then we can also, like, the prediction can get involved here. Now we can say, if evolution's true, we should now see this gradient change in the skull size. And then we look at that, and we go back to the parabolic jaws that I mentioned, and we see this. Like, we see how a jaw goes from here to a way more parabolic shape through these transitional fossils. But these rosehip neurons have been circulating through a lot of creationist documents and saying that, like, that's why we couldn't be classified with these hominins or with apes or with any of that, because we actually find that it separates us. But what's funny is that they stop there. There's a paper called Origins of De Novo Genes in Humans and Chimpanzees that was published in 2015. And what we find is that we do have orphan genes that separate us from other hominoids. But the chimps also have genes that are separating them from the other hominoids.
Right.
And they just kind of stop right at this spot. And Gutsick Gibbon did a really good video kind of debunking these things. But she actually further elucidated on what the novel purpose of these de novo genes are. And what we found out is that they're responsible for the gene expression of testicular tissue. And so these creationists have been arguing for what separates us from ball sack skin. So it's just absolutely like one of the most brilliantly hilarious fucking things you'll ever read. But yeah, Gutsick Gibbon America did a phenomenal job at exposing that. And so
I want to show two comments here. Are you guys aware of Christians that attempt to explain why God chose evolution? I've heard Christians say that if evolution is true, it was what God implemented. I don't really understand how they can. I don't know. I mean, I guess one doesn't disprove the other depending on your definition. I don't really understand the rationale behind that approach, especially considering that, like we said, evolution
is not a good code. No, sorry, but we can get into that.
But that's the thing. It's like evolution isn't always, like we said earlier, a progress.
Yeah, look at a giraffe. Look at the larynx. I think it's called not larynx. Something nerve. Something nerve. Laryngeal nerve. It takes this huge detour that's entirely unnecessary.
And there are the weird things that they'll say things, to explain away the flaws in genetics. They'll say things like, well, it's because we're a fallen creation. And so somehow the sin of Adam and Eve translates in us being flawed in to have an evolutionary perspective, which seems completely contradictory because you can't have it both ways. Like you can't have evolution being the case and then still think that Adam and Eve is a literal story. It just doesn't follow at all.
It doesn't follow for expressly because of genetic information.
Right.
You have the material for the woman or for Eve being made through the same genetic material, the rib of Adam. You have no level of genetic diversity going from that point on to the way we do now. At least.
At some point in the future, we should have a show where we talk about this concept of perfection and how little sense it makes for perfection to create something imperfect.
Yeah. I mean, so I actually have a counter argument right now towards the perfection argument, and it's really simple. And I think you'll agree with me that the issue with the perfection thing is how it's defined. Like what ruler are we using to measure this perfection to?
Yeah, of course.
My thing is that I'll define perfection for you right now to show you why we're not going to agree. Because my definition of perfect is something that need not do anything else. So in the case of a being or a god, if a being is perfect or the god's perfect, and from my perspective, it doesn't even need to take a step to the left. It doesn't need to take a step to the right. It doesn't need to breathe. Doesn't need to eat candy. Doesn't need to create. It is perfect in the way that it is. So in addition of anything, a will to do X, Y, or Z would then define it as not perfect because in the state of perfection, it need not do anything. If it does something, it is not a perfect state. The perfect state would be the thing that has no intentions, no goals, has the most restrictions possible on it.
I've never thought of it like that. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's an interesting perspective. A couple more things.
Yeah, I was actually about to highlight that one too. I was like, before you move on, let's make sure we get the Professor Dave one. Yeah, so I got to watch that. I love Professor Dave. He's a great guy. But I saw a clip on that. I didn't get to watch the whole thing, but him trying to explain polyploidy speciation to Kent was hilarious. And he used like strawberries or some example, and it was just so fucking embarrassing. It was bad.
I have to look that up.
It was so bad, but yeah, that's always my go-to. By the way, it's like, creationists really, we don't see speciation, and it's something I wish I would have mentioned a little earlier. We do. We do witness it. We witness it in plants and animals through polyploidy speciation that produces new gametes. So we do actually, and they can't reproduce with the other species, so we can definitionally call them a new species. And it's funny because it is like Pokemon evolution in some aspects, but you don't want to accept it for some reason. But anyway,
Spartan Theology writes, have you heard of Dr. Swamida's book on Adam and Eve?
No, I need to get it, but I did. The first time I heard of Dr. Swamdi Das, I thought I read it as Dr. Swamp Ass. And I realized that if you just take 2 letters out of this guy's name or take 1 letter out and swap 1 with a P, his name is Dr. Swamp Ass.
I have no idea who that is.
I have not read his book though.
Yeah, I don't know what his arguments are. Spartan, if you want to tell us anything about it, feel free.
He's debated on Modern Day Debate a few times. I've seen him on. I just can't remember his arguments. I just remember watching a debate when it was live, him and somebody against Matt Dillahunty and someone, and the thing got screwed up. So like Dr. Swamdi, I can't say his name, but Swamp Ass got moved over to Matt Dillahunty's thing, and it said Matt Dillahunty under it, and I was like, oh, Matt Dillahunty's not white anymore. That's weird. Like, how did that happen? He's a doctor now. But anyway.
He de-evolved into.
Yeah, he evolved into a different race or something. I don't know. Which I've had conversations with people that think that's about race. It's evolution, and that gets so dangerous, especially when they quote Darwin and in regards to a lot of that, but that's a different topic, a different time.
So just I want to add a comment since Spartan is here. That I wanted to clarify something that I said in the previous video, where I talked about the relation between extremism and mental illness. Let me clarify that I'm not claiming that most theists are mentally ill. I think obviously they're under a delusion, but I wouldn't go as far as to say they're actually mentally ill. I think they're just they have misconceptions and are confused, perhaps. But I was primarily referring to those who are so dogmatic in their approach, where anything that's brought to them immediately becomes this, like, oh, it's a devil's work. Like, it's sort of this closing towards the reality in the world and new evidence,
Mm-hmm.
and this very severe us versus them kind of thinking that I think is in line with mental illness in certain degrees. And that can happen, especially in politics. But I think there's also sort of religious aspects to that.
I'd agree in a lot there. The way I look at it is like I don't think someone's. So I think mental illness is going to occur in this aspect if somebody if someone I know, like my neighbor's schizophrenic, for example, like if I see if he was to say like he saw something, right, we know of his past, we know there's mental illness there. He's not actually seeing somebody. If Spartan comes up to me, I know he's a theist, and I'm not saying he believes this, but and I've actually conversations with Spartan, so I think I can use him as an example because I don't think he claims auditory, speeches from God or visual ones for what I know. But let's assume in the situation that he doesn't, or I'm sorry, that he does. If he came up to me and says, hey, I hear the voice of God and stuff like that. Well, there is really nothing that distinguishes him from my neighbor there, unless he can actually show me that the God is real. And so I am rational until shown otherwise to think that he is under some mental.
Yeah, at that point, yeah.
And so I think that there should be some kind of line to be drawn when you're saying you hear things like that. Well, the embodiment of what we know shows that there's some issue there. And until you get an fMRI, I'm not going to call you mentally, you have a mental illness or something like that. But I am going to question that. I am going to apply that as a candidate explanation for why you think the way that you do.
I forget who says this. I know. I think I've heard it on House, but I know if House, the show House that ran years ago about a medical doctor based on Sherlock Holmes. I don't know if he got it from somewhere else, but it was something along the lines of, if you talk to God, you're religious. If God talks to you, you're insane. It's something along those lines. Okay,
I mean, yeah, because I talk to myself, or I talk to things like, oh, come on, let this happen, right? I'm not speaking to anybody. I think that's a healthy, normal kind of biological, function there that we just kind of have as social species. But so I would agree. Like, yeah, you talk to God. I don't really think anything wrong with that. But yeah, thinking that you hear that on the receptive end is concerning.
Which, I mean, ironically, is what happens in all the religious texts, where the prophets claim to have been hearing and being in contact with and in conversations with God. So it's funny how we make sort of this exception where when we see someone normally in our day-to-day life saying things like that, we look at them as, okay, there's clearly something wrong here. But then if we go back to so far back in a pre-scientific culture, then suddenly we're supposed to believe these prophets weren't crazy. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I'll just add this one last thing. He argues that Adam and Eve could be genealogical ancestors to all people today without being genetic ancestors. I don't know what that means.
When I read that, I was. It's to me seems like you're saying like I could argue that you have biological parents without them having to have sex. So
Right.
I don't see how that works.
Yeah, it seems to be completely contradictory. Like, what is being said there?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I probably think that's it for me in terms of the kind of broad discussion on it. I do want to get into maybe some human evolution at some point. Maybe we can get Gutsick Gibbon on, because she's an actual paleontologist.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
And she could kind of go in a lot of things. I really want to kind of get into the misconceptions that people have, that I was talking with somebody on Discord saying that we've only cohabited with Neanderthal. I can't remember Linsis. I think, I don't remember what they claimed, but I wanted to explain that they had missed out Homo heidelbergensis. I'm trying to think right now. Naledi, and then we even have a more recent one at Luzensis. I can't remember the newest one, but I want to go into evolution and things like that in the future to kind of clear up those things. I'm not somebody that's into paleontology as much or human evolution, on a professional level by any means, but hopefully we can get Gutsick on and she could.
That'd be great. And also, there are far more misconceptions generally and more specific that we can go into in the future. This was just a first part to something that we'll explore more deeply in the future.
Yeah. So guys, thank you pretty much for the support and watching.
Always. Thank you.
I don't know why I said pretty much, but very much. While I try to find my button so that I can successfully log out without the lag, even though I'm doing it right now. No, we do appreciate it. I have a debate on the 29th with David Gonzalez, who he came on the show at the very beginning.
He was on the second episode, and I'm still waiting for him to reply to the moral argument. He said that he would respond to it, and I never heard a response yet. But
sure.
David is a good guy. I do respect the fact that he does come on and discusses things. I just think he's deeply confused. But hopefully he'll come back and maybe provide a response to our conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great. Cease is going to have. I know he said he wants to have someone that he's familiar with in his department come on the show. I'll let him explain any of the details in case that's changed. And then I know that we have, I think, 2 professors you said that potentially will be coming on, and then Matt Slick, if he's gotten back to me, should be coming on. My debate on the 29th is with David on, does the Christian God exist? I'm taking the affirmative that no, the Christian God does not exist. I will not be a new atheist. I will be a new atheist, and taking the claim that God does not exist. So I kind of want to just mention this. I'm kind of on board with the Christians and the theists that get pissy at the new atheists. Not that there's anything wrong with the lack of belief. I 100% agree with the definition, but I do wish more atheists would be comfortable looking at the purported evidence and going, yeah, this God doesn't exist, because it's as easy, from my perspective, to make that declaration as it is to say Zeus does not exist. So I wish more of you guys would jump on the train, to be honest. But anyway, we'll get into
it. For me, just out of being precise, for just kind of my OCD brain, I prefer to just say, obviously we don't know, but everything points to this having no grounds whatsoever. That's kind of my preferred approach. Also, guys, stay tuned for a discussion on idealism. A few actually are coming up that we're going to be having with a few people. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I'm very excited. We hit 24 today, guys. 25 will be the next episode, and look forward to some. I've said this probably 23 episodes now, but look forward to some narration videos in the future. It will happen. Let's set a goal right now. I say by episode, if we don't have the narration by episode 40, we got some goals. Okay?
40?
Yeah, which 15 episodes from now. if we don't have a narration by then, we should just quit everything. I'm just kidding. We should just join. Just go back and I'll beg for my job back with the Atheist Front. I'm just kidding.
No, I'll push you to try to get that out sooner than that. Hopefully.
Yeah. Please help me out with pushing me because I can't push myself apparently. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. We apologize to Pasta Mike. We try to have more time to have him come on. We always seem to run out of time. I have him backstage right now. He's waiting to come on, but unfortunately we just don't have enough time.
One day.
So apologies to Pasta Mike. Our time has ended. But we love you guys.
Love you, Pasta.
Take care.
And love everyone.